Essay point number 4. Abraham's tithe to Melchizedek in Genesis 14 was probably an example of pagan tradition. Abraham's tithe to Melchizedek in Genesis 14 was probably an example of pagan Arab tradition. Abraham's tithe is not an example for Christians to follow and for the church. I want to give you 11 reasons for this statement. Number 1, Abraham did not freely tithe. Your preacher might say so. Your evangelist may say so. Even some commentaries may say so. But the Word of God does not say that Abraham freely chose to tithe. Number 2, Abraham's gift was not a holy tithe. That which Abraham gave to Melchizedek from the spoils of war does not fit the biblical definition of tithe at all, and it would not have been accepted as a tithe under the Mosaic law. Number 3, Abraham's tithe was pagan. What Abraham tithed came from Sodom and Gomorrah in that area of the world. He retrieved it from pagan Babylonians. And at least the 90% of what he retrieved was returned to pagans in Sodom and Gomorrah. His tithe was purely a pagan custom. Number 4, Numbers 31 set spoils of war at 1%. If you're going to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges, then you need to see what the Word of God teaches is required as a tithe from spoils of war. And it is not 10%, it is 1% in Numbers chapter 31. Number 5, Abraham's tithe was a one-time recorded event. The Word of God does not record an instance of Abraham ever tithing again to anybody. Number 6, Abraham's tithe was not his property. The Bible does not say that Abraham ever paid a tithe from his own personal property. Is that an example for Christians to follow? Number 7, Abraham kept nothing for himself. He gave 10% of the spoils of war to the king of Jerusalem, and he gave the other 90% of the spoils of war to the king of Sodom. Is that an example for Christians to follow? Number 8, Abraham's tithe is not quoted anywhere in the Bible to promote tithing. You would think if Abraham's tithe were so important that Moses somewhere in the law would have referred to it or quoted it to support tithing. When it is quoted in Hebrews chapter 7, it is merely a vehicle to prove that Melchizedek was greater than Abraham and Aaron. Point number 9, Genesis 14, verse 21, not verse 20, verse 21 is the key text to understanding Genesis 14. If you look this up in commentaries, you'll be surprised, as I was, that more than half of the commentaries say that the 90% in verse 21 was governed by pagan Arab tradition. Point number 10, 10% to God, 90% to Sodom or to Satan. Is that an example for Christians to follow today? Point number 11, as priests themselves and the head of the household, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob traveled their land a lot. If they gave a tithe at all, it was following the custom that they would give food at the altars they built for Yahweh. There is no example of tithing as we see it in the Mosaic Law or in the Christian church from the example in Genesis 14.